Welcome to a small tutorial on the new features I've included in the spring version of NodeSet Pro. The most important new feature I want to show you is the ability to work with collections of texture sets. Oftentimes you have multiple textures ordered in folders or subfolders, and it would be easy if you can access them all in one go. In order to do so, I've included a panel to manipulate these texture sets. And this panel is typically available in the Tools region of your NodeSet editor. If it's not visible, like here, you can make it visible by pressing T, and you will get in the Texture Set tab a panel called NodeSet Materials. And the way it works is like this. You have somewhere a folder with all sorts of texture sets. So basically what you do is you open this folder, and here it's open from the last time I exercised this demo. You select your texture set tutorial, and in this case we select the one I've created especially for this tutorial, and you can see that there are numerous 4 texture sets available in this directory. If I accept this directory, you will see that the NodeSet Materials panel lists all the available materials by their base name. So it's easy to see which materials are here. Now, if you want to use one or more of these materials in your scene, you can select one of them or more, or all of them. And after you have enabled them, they will be available from your material drop-down. So for instance, if we want to apply the bronze material, we can do this by simply selecting the material we have just enabled. If you don't want to use them anymore, you can disable them. This will not delete the materials, but it will remove the fake user. So any materials not referred to by an object, like the ones with a little 0 in front of it, will be removed from the blend file once you save this blend file. Even if you have enabled them all, this works the other way around. So even if you don't use them, and again, the materials like, all of them actually in this list now have this fake user attached to it, which will mean that even if there is no object that refers to this material, when you save this blend, these materials will be saved along with the blend. So it's up to you what you do. By default, this material of this NodeSet Materials panel is available in the Tools region of the NodeSet editor and in the Tools region of the view. The 3D view. This is because, as you can see, there are lots and lots of tabs here in the Tools region of the Node editor, almost all of them disabled by default, and then this Texture Set tab would be the last one in this list. You cannot change this order, so it might be a little bit inconvenient. So I've included this in the Tools area of the 3D view as well. But of course you could argue that texture sets have nothing to do in the 3D view. So I've provided an option in the preferences where you can disable either one of them if you don't like it. But it doesn't hurt, so I'll keep it for now. Talking about preferences, if we have a look at the user preferences for the NodeSet Pro add-on, there are of course a lot of preferences here. And you might have a completely different set of preferences for your workflow. So out of the box, NodeSet Pro works with Substance Painter texture sets, but you might be working with textures from textures.com or Polygon, or I don't know. After carefully creating proper suffixes and all sorts of other settings for your setup, you might want to save them. And now this is possible. Out of the box, NodeSet Pro comes with a couple of presets that are useful for a couple of common texture providers. For instance, textures.com. So if we change it, you will see that, for instance, the suffix for the base color is changed to albedo. And we'll see in a moment how this simplifies your workflow if you work with textures from textures.com. You can separately change the behavioral presets, so whether you want to include, for instance, a UV map or normal map nodes, etc., etc. And importantly, if you want to filter texture names based on some keywords, well, if you work with albedo, then you might want to use some different keyword as well. So here we have a different keyword, so you can separate the presets you save for both the texture sets itself and the behavior. And if you create one yourself, so for instance you change this to something completely different, you can create a new texture set by simply clicking on the plus sign, enter a proper name here, and then save it later. If we now have a look, we have changed this texture presets and the behavior presets to something useful for the 3D scans of cdtextures.com. If we now close this and we go for a new texture, for instance, let's close this one, and then say, well, change this texture as before. And now I go to textures.com, and now it just works for the texture set from CD Textures. So this way, if you work with different workflows from time to time and you have created a set of proper presets for each workflow, you can easily change between those workflows later on. If we now have a look at some smaller enhancements in this revision of NodeSet Pro, for instance, you can see here that we have added a roughness control. So now a roughness channel by default has a color ramp inserted in the noodle, so you can easily change the roughness behavior of your map. Another change is a little bit more subtle. For instance, normally all textures are projected in a flat manner, and that's normally what you use if you have UV unwrapped meshes. But you might be working with procedural textures that are simply projected onto your mesh using a box mapping method. So when you don't use UV unwrapping, for example. If you want to use that in your workflow, instead of changing it for all 5 textures or even more, you can create in your preferences a workflow that will use box mapping instead. So if we have a look at our user preferences again, in the behavior section, we now have an option to use a different projection method. So for example, if we use box mapping, blended box mapping, you can even set the amount of blending that you want by default. If we now add this same texture again, you will see, if we expand the albedo, for instance, that we have blended box mapping. So this way, even if you work with a different projection method, you can easily integrate that in your workflow and save you a couple of clicks. Of course, if you do work with blended box mapping, you might say, well, this mapping node and the UV map input are redundant. So this was already possible, but you can change this in your user preferences as well to leave them out. So for instance, if you say, well, I do not want to use any texture and I also don't want to use a mapping node, then you can simply remove these options from the noodle. So change this again and see what happens here. Add a texture, use the same texture, and now these UV input node and the mapping node are removed. So that results in a cleaner material setup. So that's it for now. So we saw new texture set manipulation options in the form of panels, different collections of preferences can now be saved, and we have included some useful default ones. We added the option on by default to control the roughness channel with a mapping, with a color ramp, and we added some options to change the default projection mode of any texture node. Hope you like it. NodeSet Pro is available on Blender Market. The new features are of course free for people who already purchased the original version of NodeSet Pro. Well, hope you liked it. Thanks for watching and see you again. Bye bye.